Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 65, Natasha Romanov. Natasha never enjoyed the heat of California. Because of her pale skin, she always stood out here like a sore thumb unless she spent hours putting on makeup that was all too likely to be washed away by sweat and the scorching sun. She never pretended to be local for that exact reason, but people were still more likely to remember her in the midst of all the blonde and tan girls walking down the streets. Clint loved it for some reason. Only after a few days his skin was darkening to a nice warm suntanned color too. His hair was going to start looking slightly lighter as well the more time he spent on the sun. In only a few weeks he could very well pretend to be one of the 1,000 surfer guys on the beach. Natasha really hoped they wouldn't have to spend that much time here. Not that they weren't staying in a nice neighborhood. They had a pleasant beach house instead of some dingy apartment because those were the only available properties around here. They were only about 10 minutes away from Tony Stark's mansion, after all. It required some considerable persuasion skills for Natasha to convince Fury not to go knocking on Stark's front door when they already had Bruce in there. She knew Bruce was only going to provide as much information as he wanted, but it would do more harm than good to damage the open line of communications the Avengers had with Stark. Fortunately, Fury knew that Stark was not easy to deal with and agreed that considering everything Potts may have told him, it was best to proceed with caution. It was a delicate situation. Natasha knew very well that there was very little chance of Stark agreeing to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. again, but he could seriously worsen the situation between the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. if he wanted to. Rogers was the leader, but nobody would be stupid enough to underestimate the influence Stark could have. And it wasn't just about all the money his company spent on the Avengers. Fury reluctantly agreed that they should wait for whatever information Bruce provided before deciding what to do. She wasn't surprised that it was impossible to get information on Stark through Stark Industries, Potts, or Colonel Rhodes. It was also not shocking that they did not manage to find whatever ship Stark came back with. Wherever it was too well hidden. Natasha was sort of convinced that it never landed on Earth, or if it did, it had a better camouflage system than the helicarrier. Natasha was getting impatient and restless with nothing to do, but Clint was enjoying lying around doing nothing and calling it work. He was probably just glad to be away from the usual Avengers/S.H.I.E.L.D. troubles for a while. Natasha didn't want to remind him that the peace was not likely to last. Stark was imponderable right now. Natasha knew the man he was before, but not who he was right now. She noticed way too many differences, even just during the brief interview, to consider the changes in him irrelevant. She couldn't care less about whether he looked younger. That was not an important factor. The Stark from before would have flaunted whatever technology he had a lot more. He wouldn't have just announced the existence of some in such a secure way. Stark was playing safe, which had to mean that he had things to hide. It couldn't just be technology. Her best guess was a crew, obviously alien in origin, but even that wasn't adding up. There was something else, and Natasha did not feel very good about not knowing what it was. Clint walked into the room with his phone plastered to his ear. "From Bruce." "Heads up! We're about to get some info from Bruce," he said, then hung up. Natasha was already moving to the other side of the room where they set up their gear. It was not Stark level of tech, but it was good enough. "Fury?" Natasha asked. She knew she didn't have to say more, and Clint would understand. "Cap agreed to have him updated," Clint said. Crap. Things had to be serious if Steve agreed so easily to share information with Fury. "I'm optimistic," Clint said as he dropped down to the couch. "If it's really aliens, then Steve would feel obligated to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. about it, even if they're not a threat." "We'll see," Natasha said. She was not so optimistic in this matter. Then Fury appeared in a small window, and Natasha pulled it over to a different monitor to have him on full screen. "So, what could you tell me?" Fury asked right away. "Dr. Banner is going to contact us soon," Natasha said, "and Captain Rogers agreed that you needed to be informed about certain things." "Now why don't I like the sound of that?" Fury mused. "Call them. The more we know, the better." Natasha did so, establishing connection with the Avengers Tower. Natasha put this window up to full screen as well. She stepped back from the computers so that Clint could see too, but she did not sit down. Steve appeared on the screen a moment later. "Natasha, Clint, Director Fury. He greeted with a nod. His shoulders were tense and he had a frown on his face. He was angry or concerned. It was hard to tell when he stayed so still. "Hey, Steve," Clint said in return, but Fury cut to the chase without bothering with pleasantries. "I assume Dr. Banner is back in New York," he said, "and that he has information that concerns S.H.I.E.L.D. For Fury, that was downright pleasant. "Yes, I'm here," Bruce's voice sounded, and a moment later he walked into the screen to stand next to Steve. "Hey, Bruce," Clint greeted just as cheerfully as before. "Yes, hello, Clint. Natasha." Bruce nodded. "And yes, I do have things to tell you. I told some of it to Steve already, and he thought it was best if we called you before I continued." "So is it aliens?" Clint asked. "Well, yes, but that's not really what I want to talk about," Bruce said. "You're telling me that Stark really does have a bunch of aliens with him, and that it's not the biggest news you have?" Clint asked. Bruce took off his glasses and crossed his arms over his chest. "Well, no, it's not. I will talk about them too, but we should start with something else. So, yes, it's about Loki." Natasha carefully did not look at Clint, but she knew that if she did look, she would see him tense a little before he relaxed again. That was an involuntary reaction he still couldn't stop himself from doing. Steve shifted his weight from one foot to another, but that was all. Fury started forward, not reacting at all. "I'm listening," he said after a moment. "So yes, we knew Tony and Loki were taken at the same time, so now Tony cleared up a few things about what exactly happened back then. So first of all, Tony was a target too. He didn't just get caught in the crossfire. Loki was at the tower because he tried to escape those guys, but they would have come for Tony anyway. Secondly, it seems like they were put in some sort of deep state of hibernation or cryostasis for a couple of months while they were transported into a prison in the Cassiopeia galaxy. That's Andromeda the 7th, as we call it here on Earth, and it's about 2.6 million light years away." "Oh, fuck," Clint cursed. "So yeah, by the time we noticed Tony was gone, he was probably already at least a few star systems away," Bruce added. They all searched for Stark for a long time. Even if there had been a high possibility that he was no longer on Earth, they still had to search the globe. Knowing that no matter how quickly they reacted, there was nothing they could have done was not exactly comforting. It just made Natasha feel vulnerable and incompetent. "So Tony and Loki were imprisoned at the same place," Bruce continued, "and Tony got a lot of information from him. First of all, the ones who took them were the same people who were behind the attack on Earth." "Loki was behind the attack on Earth," Clint said right away. "Well, no," Bruce said and continued before anyone could interrupt. "Loki was sent here by someone else, and they were not really his allies." Clint opened his mouth to say something, but Bruce put up a hand. "Just let me finish." Tony said that after the first time Thor was on Earth, he and Loki had a huge fight in Asgard, and Loki ended up falling into space. He called it the void in between the branches of Yggdrasil. I'm not exactly sure what else to call it. He said people died or went mad or both if they ended up there. "What does this have to do with anything?" Clint asked. "There's this being," Bruce said. "Tony called him the Mad Titan. He's the one who pulled Loki out of there, but not out of the goodness of his heart. Tony said the Mad Titan was banished from there, the Nine Realms, by Thor's grandfather and his allies. He said he's obsessed with death, and because of it, he kills and destroys as much as possible. He slaughtered billions, destroyed entire planets, and more. So yes, very unpleasant guy. Also, something was taken from him when he was banished, a weapon, I guess. Tony didn't say what exactly, but that something is still in Asgard. He wants it back, of course." "What does this have to do with Earth?" Fury asked. "Yes, well, that is something Thor forgot to mention to us, I suppose," Bruce said. "Turns out that Asgard and the Nine Realms do not exist in the same reality as the rest of the universe. We didn't go into much detail, but Tony said Earth was the gateway. Loki told him that Earth exists both in the physical universe and this metaphysical place that is the Nine Realms. So if anyone wants to go from one side to the other, they have to go through Earth." There was a moment of silence after Bruce told them that. "Well, that's just great," Clint said. "So Earth was not the target at all?" Natasha asked. "It was not the ultimate target," Bruce said. "We're like a bridge, the only safe place they can cross the borders." "But Loki wanted the Tesseract," Steve said. "Loki didn't want anything," Bruce said. "The Mad Titan wanted the Tesseract, and the only reason he knew it was here in the first place was because he sort of pulled the knowledge out of Loki's mind, forcibly." You said they were not Loki's allies. Natasha said her mind was already running with possibilities. With every new piece of information, the full picture shifted into a brand new image. No, they pulled Loki out of that void and held him captive for information, Bruce said. They knew he was from Asgard. He led his army, though, Natasha said. It was his army, right? This Titan's? Yes, Bruce nodded. Tony said that the Mad Titan has this right-hand man called the Other. Loki convinced him that he knew Earth better than anyone else they could send and told them that he would give them the Tesseract if he got to keep Earth for himself. So he made a deal, Steve concluded. Tony said he wanted to get away from them, so he jumped at the first opportunity, Bruce said. What I understand from this, Fury said, is that those who actually wanted the Tesseract and intend to use the Earth as their bridge are still out there. Is that what you're telling us, Dr. Banner? Yes, exactly. Bruce nodded. And will they attack again? Natasha asked. Tony said that they will, eventually, Bruce said. But with the Tesseract secured in Asgard, they don't have any shortcuts, so they don't have the means to transport entire armies here. Tony said it would be too risky for them to try and travel through Andromeda or the whole Milky Way, because there are plenty of powerful empires out there who would stand in the way of a hostile army. Their forces would be decimated before they could reach us. But they can send individuals or smaller groups to get their hands on something that would help them on the long run, Natasha said. Like the Tesseract, Steve said. Or Tony. What did they want Stark for? Fury asked. Nuclear weapons, Bruce said. They saw him destroy the whole army with a single blow. The Mad Titan was impressed and wanted to recruit him, or at least get it out of him how to build weapons like that. Tony obviously refused, so they tried to convince him in a more violent way, just like they did with Loki before. Oh, so we're lucky Stark didn't return completely crazy and working for the bad guys. Good to know, Clint said in a clipped tone. Earth is the bastion, Steve said, the first line of defense. Yes, they want Asgard. Earth is just in the way. Bruce agreed. Well, I will certainly have some very interesting questions for Thor once he returns, Fury said. And considering where this information came from, I will also want some confirmation. Tony met the Other personally, Bruce said. That's enough proof for me. Stark needs to share everything he knows about them, Natasha said. We need to be prepared, and we need more information for that, even if it's information that came from Loki. Which brings us to my next question. Fury said, what happened to Loki? Do we need to be prepared for him too? And what about Stark's crew? Like, can they be trusted? Steve asked. We could use more people. Well, the two is connected, Bruce said as he rubbed his neck. They all seem to be following Tony's lead, and there's only, two of them I'm not comfortable with. And no, I don't think we need to worry about Loki right now. The Mad Titan is a common enemy, and I'm pretty sure Loki wants nothing to do with him. You worked with him before, Clint pointed it out. Yes, after a mental breakdown and severe torture, Bruce said simply. Trust me, he wants them dead. Tony said that he was going against them as much as he could from the very start. He was just not really in the mental state to, stand his ground or turn against them completely. Surprisingly, Natasha did not doubt the possibility of that at all. The more she thought about the invasion, the more obvious some of Loki's mistakes became. He was not stupid, so Natasha suspected that he was too out of his mind to think straight and plan well, but now that she knew more about the circumstances, a more or less deliberate failure was looking more plausible by the second. The final act of defiance by someone already beaten, a chaotic and mad charade, false obedience wrapped up in the disguise of a jealous petty prince, a warning concealed as a dramatic and egotistical display of a greedy fool. Thousands of dead, but not millions. Some might even call it a success, even if the collateral damage was great. Loki was crazy, but not an idiot. He was also not someone who willingly bowed to others, too prideful for that. It was all starting to look very plausible indeed. There was a time when she had to pretend to bow to the will of another, had to drench her hands in blood to get rid of even the smallest flicker of doubt they had in her. She knew what it was like to leave hints for others while waiting for the right moment to run or to strike back. You lie and kill in the service of liars and killers. That time Natasha thought Loki was just projecting, but maybe he was dropping hints after all. a half-mad murderer clawing his way out of the grasps of the bigger monsters, tearing at his chains, yanking his collar, and just letting the world burn around him in the meantime. No, she should stop drawing parallels. She pushed the thoughts away. Bruce, you're stalling, for the love of God, just say it, Clint said, obviously annoyed. Fine, just don't do anything hasty, Bruce said. Loki came back with Tony. The following shocked silence really was no surprise. Natasha said nothing. She was watching Bruce instead and kept her mind blank to observe. He looked careful, but not worried. Of course, Bruce had a very tight lid on his emotions, so it was not always easy to read him. She watched Rogers as well. His face was easier to read. He was visibly tense, but also resolute. He was probably already considering their options, but waiting for more information before making a decision. Always the tactician. And where is he now? Fury asked finally. Look, you can't do anything, Bruce said. Oh, you want to bet? Clint said sternly as he stood up from the couch to stare out of the window. They had a perfect view of Stark's house from here. What I mean is that he's not hostile at the moment, Bruce said. And he can't march in there and try to lock him up because it won't work. We'll see about that, Fury said. No, you don't get it, Bruce argued. This is not the Loki we had to fight against. On the day Tony made his public return, Loki was here. He was right here in the tower. We just didn't notice because he can shift his shape. Then he simply teleported us over to the West Coast like it was nothing. It only took a few moments. We did not see anything like that from him before. He's sane. He's in control of himself and his magic. He's thinking clearly. He's not the maniac running around destroying things and cackling like a cartoon villain. He's calm, and he's a lot smarter than I gave him credit for, if I'm honest. And even if you managed to lock him up, he will be gone in a blink. There's no way any cage can actually hold him unless it's something magical. On top of all that, Tony won't let you try locking him up. You're saying Tony is protecting him? Steve asked with a deep frown. They were locked up together, they escaped together, and traveled back home together. They've been in this together from the start, 24/7 for years, fighting for their lives. Tony trusts him. They're close, and the rest of the crew is there too, and they won't let you just attack Loki either, so you shouldn't try. That's what I'm saying. No need to do anything hasty. This is a delicate situation. You all need to realize that. So we should just sit around and do nothing, wait for Loki to attack? Fury asked. I don't think he will, Bruce said. I don't trust his long-term plans, but he won't do anything Tony doesn't want him to do. What makes you so sure? Steve asked. He's really invested in Tony, Bruce said. He's, Tony knows how to handle him. Natasha narrowed her eyes as she looked at him. How close is close? Exactly, she asked. Bruce rubbed his forehead, obviously thinking it over. Bruce? Steve prompted. Intimately close? Bruce said, finally making it sound like a question. That just complicated matters even more. So you're saying that I shouldn't be worried about the crazy war criminal having a holiday in Malibu because he's a regular in Stark's bed? Fury asked. Look, think what you want, Bruce said. All I'm saying is that we can't strike first. We have a deal with Asgard. As long as Loki behaves, we can only wait for Thor to show up. He's right, Natasha said. What? Fury asked right away. Asgard wants Loki alive. Even if they didn't, we still don't have anything that could actually harm him unless you want to wipe LA completely off the map. And from what we know now about his powers, we can't actually contain him either. Well, I guess we could try to narcotize him, but we still would have to go up against Stark to do it. I don't think that's smart. Stark's crew is also an unknown factor. And does Loki plan to cooperate once Thor is here? Steve asked. Tony said they would deal with Thor and Asgard. Bruce said, I don't like the sound of that at all. Fury said, Dr. Banner, how sure are you that Stark is in control of his own mind? It was a valid question, and Bruce did not seem surprised by it. I only spent a few days there, but as far as I can tell, there is no form of mind control involved. They just spent a lot of time together in a horrible situation. Tony's a little different, sure, but not drastically. His eye colors are also the same as before, if you were wondering. It looks very different in other ways, though. Did Loki work some form of magic on him? Fury asked. Tony said that was a side effect of the healing elixir he had to take when he was mauled by a giant lizard or something. Bruce said. He said that the elixir fixed more than just the wound. Dr. Banner, there is no proof that Stark is reliable in this matter, Fury said. Maybe he's under control, maybe not, but he obviously cannot be trusted to make a sound judgment. I don't even question his loyalties. I think it's clear that his loyalties do not lie with any of us. Look, Loki is not our main concern, Bruce said firmly. I don't want him here either, but it's best if we don't poke the sleeping dragon. He's been here for weeks. We need to keep an eye on him. I know that. I agree with that. But aggression is not the right move. And you're right. Tony was very clear about him and Loki standing on the same side. But he also said that he wants to stay on the same side as the Avengers. What do you think about this, Captain Rogers? Fury asked. Steve shared a look with Bruce before crossing his arms over his chest. I will speak with Tony personally before making a decision, he said then. But I think we cannot ignore what the true culprits have done to both him and Loki. So if Loki is willing to stay put and behave until Thor comes to take him to his trial in Asgard, then I agree that we should only keep an eye on him instead of going on the offensive. Fuck this! Clint cursed and headed toward the door. Clint? Natasha turned to him. I need some air, he said in an agitated tone without stopping. The door slammed shut a moment later. Nobody commented on it. There was nothing to say, not really. You personally fought Loki, Captain, and now you're telling me you're willing to let him off the hook? Fury asked. That is not what I said, Steve replied. Nobody is letting him off the hook. He will be taken to his trial. Does he claim he's innocent, Bruce? Not at all, Bruce said. But Tony thinks he was punished enough, because twice now he was a prisoner of this mad titan, and the other, he was coerced into a lot of things. I don't think we can fully ignore that, personal feelings aside. That is something Asgardians to decide, Steve said. It's out of our hands already. We agreed. Thor will jump at this chance, Natasha said. If Loki tells him all this and plays nice. He will take his side, Fury said, nodding to himself. Thor won't just forget the things he did, Steve argued. No, but if he thinks that there's a chance of getting his brother back, he will take it, Bruce said. Even I think that the circumstances change things. Now imagine how Thor will take the news that his little brother was beaten into obedience by some crazy alien warlord. How they tortured him until he agreed to work with them. It doesn't absolve him of everything, not at all. But Thor won't look at this rationally. Loki is his brother. He will be willing to forgive, especially after he sees how not crazy Loki is acting. You're right, Steve agreed. All the more reason to make sure this situation does not escalate. We need to keep things under control. It cannot turn into a fight unless Loki makes the first move. Natasha was willing to agree, maybe to help sway Fury in the right direction a little, but then she heard the engine of Clint's SUV roaring to life. Shit! She cursed and rushed to the door just in time to see him speed away on the street. I think he's going over, she said when he returned to the room. Stark? She's not online, Tasha, Bruce said. We're connecting through Jarvis, Natasha said. You really think he was not eavesdropping? Stark, Clint is on his way to your house. He's probably going to be there in about 6 minutes. She wasn't surprised at all when a new window popped up with Stark's face. You were in Malibu? He asked. Jarvis, why didn't you tell me they were in Malibu? It seems like their equipment conceals the exact location, sir, Jarvis answered. Well played, Romanov, Stark said. Stark, you have something explaining to do, Fury said. Sorry, can't do, Stark answered. Cap, I'm going to call you later, but let me tell you that you just got about 24 gold stars for not wanting to kick down my door right away. Don't think I don't have a bone to pick with you, Steve said. But welcome back. Stop it, Cap. I might start liking you, and it's already making me feel all weird. Stark, Clint's going to be standing on your front step in a couple of minutes, Natasha reminded him. Right. Stark said, well, I guess we'll deal with him later. And then his window vanished. Oh, this is not good at all, Bruce said. Want me to go after him? Natasha asked Fury. Wait 20 minutes before you go, Fury said. Barton might even get some extra information, and I suppose we'll see how non-hostile Loki really is. With that, his window closed too. You do realize that Fury expects Clint to provoke Loki, Steve said. Clint can handle himself, and if Stark can handle Loki as well as you said, Dr. Banner, then there shouldn't be a problem. She was not completely convinced of that because Clint became very irrational when it came to Loki. She also knew nothing about this different, sane Loki Bruce was talking about. She just couldn't predict what was going to happen. 20 minutes seemed too long, but it was a test. She knew it. Vera was constantly testing both her and Clint, pushing at their boundaries to see where their loyalties lied. Clint's been failing his tests for a long time now. Natasha was still doing well as far as she could tell. It was an increasingly annoying game of chess. "We have 20 minutes, she said, trying to push away her thoughts about Clint for the time being. "Tell me about this crew before I march in there too."